Hi, everybody. In today's session of the Midlife Reinvention Summit, I have the pleasure of speaking to Richard Campbell, the founder of 10 Adventures, who will be sharing his personal story of midlife reinvention and also talking to us about how adventure could be a powerful catalyst for reinvention itself. Richard was the COO at a 400-person consulting company before he decided to make the shift and become an entrepreneur and founded 10 Adventures, which is a travel platform that makes it easy to book customizable private adventure trips. Richard, thank you so much for taking part in the Midlife Reinvention Summit. So, how are you going today?
I'm doing great, Damien. Great to see you again. I really love what you're doing with this summit. I wish this had been around 10 or 15 years ago when I was going through all these questions, and it was hard to figure out like what to do, what was right for me. So you're doing a great service to everyone who's searching for a better life.
Brilliant. So, well, let's get started. So, what was your life like before you decided to make the shift and start 10 Adventures, which I would suggest is your big reinvention in midlife?
Yeah, so probably pretty similar to a lot of the people watching. Successful in a consulting corporate environment. We'd grown a company from about 20 people to 400 people, a couple million a year, a couple $1 million a year in revenue to almost $100 million a year in revenue. I'd grown from an analyst to chief operating officer. And yeah, it was from the outside a great life. I would wake up, get to, leave the house around 7 or 7:30, get home around 6. I own part of the company, so a really lucrative lifestyle as well. But I also had three young kids, and every day I'd leave, I'd think, "Oh no, why am I doing this?" Every day I'd get home, I'd just basically get home to put them to bed. And so from the outside, it was probably a great life, but for me, uh, I was really feeling like, is this the right life for me? I really enjoyed my job. It's really, really challenging. When you grow anything you grow, there's a lot of change, a lot of creativity. I really enjoyed that. Um, but I wasn't passionate about it. It wasn't like this was my life's calling. It was just something I was good at that was enjoyable, but I kind of knew it wasn't necessarily what I was, going to spend the rest of my life doing.
No, as you said before, I think a lot of people are in the same position. They may be very successful in what they are doing, but it's not really lighting themselves up. So, what was the pivot point for you when you decided I need to act on what I'm currently feeling?
So it was a long process, and I went back when I was 38. I went back and did an executive education course on leadership, and it was 2 week program. I thought, okay, this is going to help me be a better leader. And almost the entire program was on like what was important to us, and a big aspect was around authenticity, and the idea being you can't be somebody else, you got to be yourself. And so we spent a lot of time learning about ourselves, what drives us, what motivates us. And that was kind of the impetus for me, that I kind of realized like what I'm doing isn't necessarily what I'm passionate about. And so one book we used, and so I'm a guy that likes to read this book, True North by Bill George. He was one of our professors. It was kind of a workbook. Actually, there is a workbook that helps you kind of understand yourself better. And so I came back from there just kind of realizing what I was doing wasn't like perfect for me. And then I picked up a book by one of my professors, How Will You Measure Your Life? And this book just spoke to me. It was just like, oh my, this is totally what I've been missing. And really, it's written by Clay Christensen, so the famous author of An Innovator's Dilemma and all those strategy books. But this was his like approach to life, and it was all around like figure out what's important to you and do things that are meaningful for you. And in his case, his family was a big part of his life. And that really resonated with me. So I read that book, and then I just kind of start to realize, and in fact, I remember driving to work one day and I just was thinking like, I'm getting money, which I don't really care about. And I'm giving up what I really care about, which is time with these three little boys, which are mine. And I see them, for 20 minutes in the morning while they have breakfast. And I come home when they're tired and cranky and, have dinner with them and then, put them down. I just thought, this is the worst deal in the world. And I'm like, what am I doing here? If this is a terrible deal, why am I doing this? And um, so from there, I took parental leave for my third son. And I still worked part time, but I was working 5 or 10 hours a week versus whatever I was working before. And that was almost like I tried out what it'd be like to be more available for my family. And that just really connected. I had 9 months and I'm just like, this is what I'm meant to be doing right now. And I went back and I tried to work. I went back and said, okay, I'll go back and start to do my job. And I just couldn't. I just realized I was like so uh, is not unmotivated, but I'm like, this just isn't the right path for me. And so yeah, that was how I made the change, and had no plan. Just decided I'm going to spend some time being a dad and helping my wife and being available for my kids. And that was, geez, 10 years ago.
Awesome. So so basically you're working kind of like part-time, you've tried to go back, and then how did you decide what's next? Because as you said, there's still this gap. You don't know, you have a sense that this is not right for me. You know what is going to be foundational for you, the opportunity to be more time with your kids. But how did you formalize how you were going to go forward from there?
Yeah, so I didn't have a plan. And so I've always lived far below my means. So going into this, a big aspect was like, well, what does this look like financially if I just am a dad for a few years? And kind of the idea was, oh, be a dad for 3 years. Like, how do we do that? And so um I knew that, okay, like I can be a dad for 3 years. We don't live a extravagant lifestyle. Where our house was paid off. You know what? We're just gonna be living a kind of a basic life, and I don't know what the outcome's gonna be. I had a few things. I knew I want to move back into tech. I'd worked in tech earlier in my life, and I just really liked the ethos and the people in tech. They were very much like can do, whereas in my genre of consulting, it was very much can't do. And so I'm a person that likes to take on challenges and build things. So I knew that was about the only thing I wanted to do, but really, it's just I wanted to be a dad. It's really hard, I think, for a lot of people to do that, and stepping out of the workforce. I think it's hard to get back in, but in my case I just stepped out and started to be a dad. And after a few months I said to my wife, like, why don't we each take one day a week to do something, like just get fit or do whatever. And so I started hiking one day a week, and I quickly realized the information I wanted wasn't available online. I'm like, how can no website be doing this? So I said, oh, I want to get back into tech, and there's a simple problem I can solve. So I launched a website of my favorite hikes, with all the information I'd want, like, a GPS track. Where do you park? How busy is the parking lot? Are there any dangers? Will I die if I do this hike? And like almost immediately, it got super popular. And so that led in from 2016 into where we are now, with 10 adventures 10 years later, to a successful travel business. And I never, I did that website. I didn't think it would lead to a business. I thought it was more like a portfolio piece that when I did want to go work, I could say, oh, look at my chops. I built this website. It's successful. Um, but yeah, I just kind of let fate dictate it, and was open to what would happen. I didn't have any specific area to go down. So when things were started to kick off, I was just really open. I said, okay, well, I'll give this another 6 months, or I'll invest some money and see how this goes. And um, it ended up being super successful. So I always kind of say, I'm an accidental founder of a travel company because it never really entered my mind. But this little site I created became super popular and led to this, which is fantastic.
Awesome. So what I'm gathering from this is like there was a bit of experimentation. So I think a lot of people get stuck when trying to reinvent themselves because they need to find the answer. Like, and without the answer, they don't try to change. So whereas you were kind of like more exploratory, I know what I like, I'm going to explore this. Firstly, when you took the paid leave and then you decided to kind of like move. So maybe you can walk us through a little bit more what you'll take away from that experiences, and that might be translatable to other people.
Yeah, so I think one thing for me is I don't feel I reinvented myself. I think I found myself. And so I think authenticity is really the most important aspect. And Um, you know, I see lots of people, I read lots of books of people living these really incredible lives. And I think it's super engaging and it's, maybe kind of a life I'd want to live. But for a lot of times it's like I couldn't live that life. And so I didn't go into this thinking, well, here's who I want to become. I was just taking like little baby steps of like, well, this is who I am. And having the gumption, you walk away from a successful job. All my friends said, "What the heck are you doing? Like, are you crazy?" And then seeing me kind of not work or do these little, what for a long time was a piddly website. But for me, it was just really obvious. This is authentic. This is the type of life I want to lead. And so I think the hardest part is just to be confident enough in yourself that like this is the life you want to lead. I was lucky. I found these great books that kind of made it clear to me that I was not leading my authentic life. And then I was able to kind of test drive this. So, I took that leave. Okay, well, that was a really low stakes situation of, I took parental leave. I still worked a little bit, so I wasn't leaving the company in the doldrums or, in need. It was also the 2014 was a really bad year, so it was actually good for the company that I, kind of didn't work to, we were able to keep a few key people on the company in the company with me, not taking a salary. So there was lots of benefits and it was low stakes. And I think, at least for me, when you're going to do something transformational, for me at least, these low stake trials are really, really important. It sounds great to I'm going to quit my job and go and, move to a farm in the Arctic. That sounds great. But if you've never been to the Arctic, if you've never worked on a farm, that might not be the right task for you. And there's things I've done that I thought would be great and they weren't great and they were really tough. And I realized there's somebody else's authentic life. They're not my authentic life. Um, but I think the real big aspect is just, try and test as much as you can so you make sure that this change you're making is gonna work for you. The other aspect is just, having the freedom of not being money, pressured by money is just so important. And I have lots of people I know where they hate their job, they don't like their life, but they've got to keep doing it because they have two luxury cars, a luxury house, they get, all these, things and they've kind of made their life hell to have luxury goods. And I'm kind of the exact opposite. I spent my summers on a farm. I kind of grew up in a really modest life. Anytime I did well, I was like, well, this was a great bonus. I'm just going to save this money because who knows if this will ever happen again. But by living that kind of lifestyle, when I did want to reinvent myself, I didn't have the money worries. I looked at my wife and I said, yeah, we can do this. This is not going to put us into dire straits. I won't have to take a job in a year that I may not like. And so I think those aspects made this a really low stakes decision. And um, I could go into it without knowing the answer. I knew the direction, but the answer, in fact, I think I took a master's in strategy. I think in general, the direction is like 99% more important than all these, thinking out 5 years what life is going to be. If you can get on the right direction and know, maybe your next, year, that is really, really good as opposed to trying to figure out what your next 20 or 30 years are going to be.
No, very good. And the other aspect I'm gathering from you is not necessarily needing to know the end result. Like you're talking about the direction and not needing to know the end result made you open to possibilities and willing to explore things where if you are pressured to get a result, then it may narrow your focus and may actually limit the opportunities that become available for you. Would you say that was part of the reason you were able to see 10 adventures when if you were pressured or trying to get to somewhere else, it may not have become what it is today?
Yeah, 100%. And I know people who are really good at planning their lives. I know one guy who came up with a 20-year plan and he kind of did it. I look at that and say, that's incredible. I could never do that. I always wonder, what did he miss out on though? In getting this exact plan of what he did, like what opportunities came up that he just was unaware of because he was so focused on his plan. Um, there's a great quote that I use all the time: "Nothing endures but change," and in our lives, nothing endures but change. We don't know what life has in store for us. And so just being open and, being willing to change our opinions, our plans, what we think is going to work for us. I think that's really, really important. So when I embarked on this, yeah, I was going into the unknown. I think I'm lucky. I like the unknown. I like, life is interesting because I don't know what's going to happen. And for me specifically, I like to think of all the things that can happen and look at, oh, what's the best case? What's the worst case? How can I make the worst case not as bad? I think all those things really help to allow, it allowed me to do 10 adventures where, yeah, I think you're right. If I'd been so focused on I'm going to get a job in tech out of this, I would have gone and gotten a tech job and been a middle manager again, as opposed to realizing, hey, this little site I created is doing really well. Why don't I invest a little money in it? And then as it got even better, hey, why don't I start selling trips? Customers keep asking, website users keep asking if I can be their guide. Why do they think that I should be their guide? Well, maybe I should, you know, offer some trips. And then when trips started selling, realizing, oh wow, this is a business. I'm going to invest a bit more money into this kind of, you do a little step, you get some feedback, and you spend a bit more money to invest in and build a business.
Very good. So you highlighted a few things about your mindset. Is this something you've cultivated or something that you naturally have? Like, because there's some interesting things there where you, it seems, are able to deal with uncertainty. Many people don't. They kind of like shut down and need total control of everything. Otherwise, they feel uncomfortable in life, whereas you seem very open to exploring new things. Also, you have this kind of like perspective of more opportunity, possibility kind of thinking, which seems pretty important if you want to reinvent yourself. So, is this something you've naturally developed over time, or did you consciously develop this?
I think a lot of this you're just born with. And so when I was 7 years old playing ice hockey here in Canada, I wanted to be the goalie. Now, the goalie is the one person that if the goalie has a bad game, everyone knows it. If you're playing defense or forward, you have a bad game, no one notices it. There's five players on the ice plus the goalie. And I thought back, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, what type of kid at 7 wants that type of pressure, is able to just take that type of responsibility? And so there's some aspect in me that I'm okay with failing. I'm okay with, doing things that are hard. Growing up on a farm, every summer I'd be out in the farm. You work hard. You don't really have a choice in doing that. So I think part of that's just who I am. But then all my traveling, you just learn how to think of the worst case. And in fact, with traveling, it's just like, how am I going to make sure like the really worst case doesn't happen? I don't get mugged. I don't end up having to sleep on the street. I don't end up being sick, for a week. And so I think that really helped me understand like how to make decisions in the moment, how to be open to new experiences, how to plan for the downside and just enjoy the upside. So I think it's a little bit of both. I feel lucky. I was actually talking with my sons. We talk about mental health. We kind of treat them like adults, but we're talking about mental health. And I was reading a book about a guy who had a lot of negative self-talk. And we were just talking about that. And I said, I feel I'm really lucky. I don't have a lot of negative self-talk. Actually don't have any negative self-talk. I don't have any really positive self-talk. But I realized I'm actually pretty lucky because some people they're bombarded on why they can't succeed, why they're not going to be good enough. And um, I don't think those people choose to do it. I think it's something that just comes out naturally. In my case, I'm fortunate that I kind of look at opportunities and I don't say, Richard, you can't do this. It's usually, well, if someone else can do it, I'm pretty sure I can do it. Maybe I can't do it as well, but I'm definitely have an optimistic flair that, yeah, like I can do things if other people can do it. And that's probably why I've done all these things. I've been willing to go and put myself out there. And again, if I fail, I fail. Like lots of people make mistakes and fail all the time. I'm imperfect. We're all imperfect. So why should I expect not to make mistakes? Like I'm a human, just like everybody else.
Definitely. Well, you made an interesting point, like beyond the fact that you have founded a travel company, you, based on the fact that I've interviewed you a couple of times, have traveled extensively previously, and how that potentially is the reason why you're also able to navigate with uncertainty. So let's kind of like pivot a little bit and talk about adventure itself and your perspective on how adventure could be a good training ground for helping you actually navigate life more effectively, navigate change, navigate reinvention, which I believe, back to your point, you said, well, you found yourself, but I think reinvention is finding yourself, because if you are lost, you do need to reinvent to come back to who you are sometimes. So in my speak, reinvention is finding yourself if you've become lost. So let's talk about adventure, because obviously you're a big advocate for travel and adventure. You're not only about making money from this. This is something you do on a personal basis. This is what you do with your family, and you like to inspire others to do the same. So what are the benefits of adventure and travel you feel for helping people in other aspects of their life?
Yeah, so I think a really big aspect is just disconnecting from our busy lives. And um, I think everyone watching, yourself and myself, we're pulled in so many directions. We have our phones going off with emails and text messages and alerts. We have all these meetings we have scheduled at work with, seeing friends and family. Our kids have things they want to do, and we never get time just to do nothing. And so, what I think is when you go on a multi-day adventure, when you go backpacking or hiking in the mountains, or you take a pilgrimage, or you do a big bike ride, all of a sudden, all that noise that's distracting you goes away. All of a sudden, your only day is, I got to wake up, I got to eat, I got to walk or bike, I got to eat again, I got to walk or bike, I got to probably drink some coffees, maybe a glass of wine at the end of the day, and life just simplifies. You don't check your phone every 2 seconds. A lot of time your phone doesn't work. And so all of a sudden you have all this free time, and your mind can kind of just start processing and doing stuff. And you don't, I've never had like massive epiphanies. I always thought, I did my very first big walk was, I think, 6 weeks or 5.5 weeks across the Pyrenees. And I thought, I'm gonna have these great, great ideas. I didn't have that one great epiphany, but I came back changed from that walk. And so I think when you do an adventure, you just get into this situation where your mind just realizes things. You're outside, you're active, you're breathing the fresh air. There's all the scientific benefits of how that helps your mind work in different ways. But I think the big thing is you just can kind of de-stress and you start to realize things. The second aspect is, if you do one of these trips with people you care about, the amount of communication is like exponential compared to what we do in our regular lives. And if you think of your communication in your regular lives, it's around the breakfast or dinner table, kind of like very high level, kind of just chit chat. If you go and see a friend or a family member for a meal or a coffee, it's very time bound. But when you're, like, just imagine walking with someone you love for 7 days in a row. You're just walking. You got nothing to do. You can't, watch a video. You can't do anything. Chit chat goes pretty quickly. Eventually, you just start talking about stuff you've never talked about before. And you actually get really, really deep in a lot of cases. And because you're side by side, there's none of this pressure of, you're right in front of them. And you just have a really authentic conversation. And so I know with my family, we have these great discussions when we're out doing a walking holiday. And then, but also sometimes we're just quiet, or sometimes one of my kids will just come up with an idea that's, something that's, actually often pretty mature, but your brain and your mind and your body, everything just feels right. And so I think these trips are just really great to give you the freedom to have these important ideas. And I want to make sure it's never just one, oh, I've solved my biggest problem. You never, almost never have that aspect, but you just come back, you feel rejuvenated. You get a direction of where you want to go from these walking holidays. And at 10 Adventures, we have people who use a walking holiday or a biking holiday for a big celebration. They use it to find themselves. When we sell Caminos, pilgrimages to Santiago de Compostela or to the Via Francigena to Rome or anywhere, people are doing that because they want to step out of their day-to-day life. They want to reinvent themselves, even if only for a week or two, and just have that freedom to deal with grief, to deal with elation, to deal with loss, to make the decision of where their life is going to go, to try and process a job they hate. just having no distractions gives you the ability to do that, which I think is just so powerful.
No, awesome. And then I think we should talk about a point you did mention, that flexibility, that ability to kind of like deal with challenges. Because because all these trips, even though they're kind of like organized, there are elements which are unpredictable. Like there's the elements, there's the environment, like you've got people from different places and other stuff. So there's a whole lot of variation. And in I think many of us in our day-to-day life, everything is structured. And when we get hit by a change, we don't know really how to deal with it. Whereas if you are out there having an experience and you have regular experiences traveling or adventure, kind of like travel, you are accustomed to things not necessarily working the way you would like, no matter how well you plan them. And that makes you a little bit more flexible and adaptable. Would you say that's another benefit that could come from travel and adventure?
Yeah, so there's definitely the aspect of doing something hard. And so I read every review that customers write. We do a post-trip survey, and so many people say this was the hardest thing I've ever done. I can't believe I did it. I'm so proud of myself. I can't, the impact on them emotionally of doing something hard, and uh, somebody saying I walked 200 kilometers. I can't believe I walked 200 kilometers. They're kind of, their minds are blowing. And I feel like we don't do a lot of sustained hard things in our lives. And you look at, our homes are always the perfect temperature. Our food is always, pretty good. That to go and push yourself to do something hard is is I think really rewarding for a lot of people. They want to see what they can do. They want to push through something physically hard, and I think it really uh, does help people to realize, oh yeah, I'm more than I thought I was.
Awesome. So, if there's someone listening to our conversation today, they're feeling a little bit stuck in their life, they know something's off, that possibly there is more to life than what they're currently experiencing, what would be your advice for them? And perhaps the very first thing they could do to get out of where they're at this particular point in time?
So this book for me at least was just fantastic to help me ask questions and think about things as to, I knew this wasn't the right thing for me. Well, what was the right thing for me? So reading a book, and I'm sure there's dozens of books like that that are out there, but reading a book that's going to help you maybe have someone who has a bit more knowledge, present some ideas to you. Hear this discussion we're having, all the other guests you're having. There's gonna be lots of people with lots of ideas that are gonna help you work through it. Number two is make sure your financial house is in order. And this is hard if all of a sudden you're just thinking of it now, but for me, it took me kind of 2 years to go from first realizing the issue to actually making the decision. But having no financial stress is important. And I know some people would say, oh, well, look, you were leading a successful company, making good money. But I follow people that, you know, don't have jobs, that are living in a van, living an authentic life for themselves, or walking across the world, or, they sell their house in a mid-sized city to go live in the country and nature on an acreage. And so I think we always all want more money than we have, but I see people that are doing. In fact, I just read a book, The Way Home by Mark Boyle, who he renounced money. So he renounced all his money to go live on a farm in Ireland, his own farm in Ireland, with zero. And so it's like I could never live that life. It was really inspiring how he did it. But um, it's not how much money you have; it's how much money you spend. So that's the second thing, and then the third thing is test drive some of these things to make sure they work for you. And um, you don't want to radically change your life and then realize you do something you've never, you move to Japan and you realize, oh, this wasn't right for me. It was, I wish I was still back in, Kansas or London or wherever it was. And in my case, I was really inspired recently by people who were taking their families to travel the world, and they were working and traveling. I thought this would be great. 10 Adventures is a remote company. Let's go travel. So last year we did 3 2-month trips, and they were great as a family. We had all these great memories and fun times, and they were rewarding. But for me personally, they were the hardest I've ever worked because I was doing family stuff Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., Saturday, Sunday, all day. And then I was doing 10 adventure stuff from 3 to 10 every day. So for me, I was working like 90-hour weeks. And so I came back and I was just shattered where the 2 months in between every trip, I just sit by our fireplace every weekend and just read books. I couldn't do anything. And it hit me, okay, that's a great lifestyle. I'm really enamored with these people that travel the world with their family and live and work. But at this stage of my life, it's not going to work for me. And so if I'd sold my home and taken the kids out of school and done all these crazy things, I'd now be sitting there saying, oh no, I've got to now go buy a home, buy a car, I would have been a lot of effort for something that for me personally ultimately didn't work. And I think the answer in reinventing is finding what works for you. And what works for me is not going to work for anybody else because we're all humans, we're all different likes and needs. Um, so yeah, just making sure that the change you make is going to be you're able to, you're actually going to enjoy it. I think is just really, really important.
Brilliant. No, very good points. So, a few final questions I like to ask everyone taking part in the summit. So, question number one: what is the biggest lesson life has taught you after 40?
So the biggest lesson life has taught me, I think the last few years has really been about health. And so we've talked a lot about kind of lifestyle, but reading a lot of books and then talking to people, it's, after 40, your physical health declines. And I see it in a lot of things, like just I do a lot of bike training. And I noticed my FTP 20-minute power was going down, even though I was training more and then reading about the importance of strength and musculature and all these things. And so, since the pandemic, actually, it hit me really hard in the pandemic, just seeing how important your health was in terms of surviving COVID. And so, I think the biggest thing I've learned personally is like make time for physical health. And for me, it's like every week, my 4 strength workouts are like those are the 4 things I have to accomplish. So above all the work things and everything, it's like those 4 1-hour blocks, those are the things I have to do. And so it's really changing my priority to be do your physical health last. It's like, no, no, these 4 things are first. And yeah, a good life is going to be if I'm healthy physically and mentally when I'm 70. And the best time to start would have been 30 years ago, but the second best time was 5 years ago when I finally realized this.
Awesome. So, what does reinvention mean to you personally?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think it's just finding out who you are and finding out how to live a happy life. We have a limited number of years on this earth, and I remember watching videos and reading articles in my master's program about people who were either in hospice dying or people who had retired and were in their 70s or 80s, talking about what was meaningful for them, and nobody mentioned, "I wish I'd had more meetings. I wish I'd worked a few more years." Everyone talked about um, what was important to them, and it was family relationships, uh, doing the things that were meaningful for them personally. And so I think reinvention is finding out what you're going to be happy about when you're 75 and you're old, and then as much as possible doing that.
Awesome. And what advice would you give to someone who's afraid to start again?
um so for me, looking at the downside, and so understanding all the stuff that can go wrong, and then just understanding, well, how serious is this? With my example, okay, well, yeah, we don't have any income. We're going to live a more modest lifestyle. We didn't travel at all in those first 3 or 4 years, because we didn't have any income. But the downside was we spent money. The upside was we'd have this great relationship as a family. So it was actually like a pretty minor downside. So I think for people, as they can look at what's the downside, and then also knowing, hey, you may not know the downside. The example of us doing all this travel, I didn't have on my bingo card that it would exhaust me. It's pretty obvious in hindsight, but when I talked to other people who had done this, they never talked about how tiring it was. And I think the answer was they probably weren't working full-time jobs. I think they're probably working 10 or 15 hours a week, and so they fit that in quite easily. In my case, it was I didn't realize how hard it would be, kind of physically and mentally to work that much and be there for the family and be there for the job. But yeah, if you understand the downside and it's not too bad, then you understand the risk, and it helps make the decision a lot easier, at least for me.
Brilliant. Final question. What does living your best life, or what I call a legend life after 40, mean for you personally?
It's living a life that when I'm old in an old folks' home, I think back and I smile about the decisions I've made. I won't have made all the right decisions, but in the big picture, I've made the right decisions directionally. So hopefully, I have a great relationship with the people I love. They still care about me, and I have fond memories of the trips I've done. And in terms of my work, I've helped thousands, tens of thousands of people. Make great memories with people they care about as well. So I've done something good for society, and done something good for my family, and done something good for myself.
Brilliant. Well, Richard, thank you so much. Certainly an inspiring story. Certainly made a clear message that we all need to find who we are, because without finding who we are, it's going to be very difficult to kind of like create a life that's going to actually make us happy with life. So, for anyone who's interested in learning more about how they could use adventure to actually start the journey to reinventing themselves, finding themselves, perhaps you could share how we could find more about the work you do.
Yeah, so come on 10adventures.com. We've got hiking, cycling, and adventure trips in over 80 countries. Virtually all of them are private and customizable. We know that every person is different, just like finding our purpose in life. We all are going to find different things when we want to travel. We're all going to need something a little bit different. Some need harder days, some need easier days, some need nicer hotels, some want a really authentic experience. And so we've got a bunch of great hiking and cycling trips. We've also got a team that lives and breathes adventure. So you don't have to use a bunch of AI chatbots. You can call us up. You can send a message if you have questions. And we realize how important travel is in people's lives, and so we make sure that we don't try and automate this all away, or piss people off with annoying AI. It's real people that are there to help you. So you can submit a question, you can give us a call, and somebody's always there to help you find your perfect trip. And I hope everyone can take some time to explore the world and kind of start to figure out the direction their life wants to go to.
Brilliant. Well, Richard, one more time, thanks so much for taking part in the Midlife Reinvention Summit.
Thank you, Damien. It's been great. And I think, again, it's such an important thing you're doing here to help people live happier, healthier lives. So congratulations to you for doing this for all of us.
Awesome. Thank you.